an example of a full-scale indication analysis. Um, this is for psoriasis, right? So what we start off with is sort of an executive summary, but we give an overview of the disease itself for epidemiology and disease burden. Then we go over sort of the current treatment landscape from categories to profiles of available products. Then we do patient treatment flow. How are the physicians engaged with the patients? What are the treatment pathways and challenges? Uh, then we do emerging therapies and pipeline, basically what's in development. We do a full-scale analysis of clinical trials, so the pivotal and the key trials for an indication. The next two, physician insights and payer insights, we reach out as part of external market research to get insights from both physicians and payers as to how they view a drug within an indication. But obviously, this is external market research, which is not part of this course, but you should know the totality of the process, right? And all the above kind of gets us into this world of a market model and a forecast, right? And then some of the best practices for healthcare providers. Just to give you a simplistic overview of epidemiology and disease, we'd like to know what that disease is. So on the left-hand side, where it happens in terms of prevalence and incidence, and we'll cover these terms and concepts in future lectures. Some demographics, whether it's age or gender or socioeconomic. What are some of the comorbidities associated with the disease? How to separate disease severity, right? So for mild, moderate, and severe. And then finally, what forms of treatments are there, right? And where in the treatment flow does each one of those treatments fall into? So this is a quick snapshot of psoriasis that is differentiated based on severity. So a good portion of the population will have mild disease, moderate disease, and severe disease. On the left-hand side, you can see that it's in the order of 7 million. That's in the US, so that's a sizable patient population, split between, most of the disease is mild and moderate, with say a 10-15% percentage of folks that have severe disease. So this is a sample slide on aggregating treatment categories, right? So everyone wants to know, like, okay, we know the disease, we know what is the progression is, but can you kind of split out the treatments? So over here, you have sort of the topical treatments, you have the phototherapy and the systemic therapy. For different areas of asset strategy, right? It depends on which company you're at. So if you're at a pharma company that's developing systemic therapy, you'll be more interested in the right-hand side versus, say, a medical device company that's more interested in the middle, versus, say, generics or other companies that are interested in topicals. And then below, that kind of splits out the treatment categories to the severity, right? So topical treatments of phototherapy are mostly used for mild and moderate. And then systemic therapies are for moderate to severe populations. Patient flow. This is a very, very important one, because we really need to know for each disease how it progresses in terms of the patient perspective. And the first two are really important, right? So from the time someone has symptoms, or ideally before symptoms, to the time they actually get a diagnosis, let's just, for rare diseases, that can be up to 7 years. So we really want to get an idea of sort of disease awareness, both from the patient perspective or from the physician perspective as early as possible, because then they can have that discussion and a treatment selection, and finally support and fulfillment of the treatments for each disease. And like I said, this is an entire sort of class on its own. Another way to put this information together is patient and treatment flow by severity of disease. Um, so this goes a little bit deeper into the diagnosis and how that's differentiated between mild, moderate, and severe. And what are sort of the treatment prescription or combinations or annotations associated with treatment flow. For any market analysis, you're going to have to do clinical trials, right? So in psoriasis was and is a big indication, but it is good to know how big that market is. As you can see that um, when we did the research a few years ago, there was 247 phase 2 trials and 220 phase 3 trials. And during the course, I'll tell you what those trials are. And thousands and thousands of patients are enrolled across them, with sort of other metrics, because we need to know sort of the competitive environment for clinical development, like who else is doing it and what they're doing and how far along are they. When we get to the clinical trials analysis, this is essentially what we'll do. We'll try to figure out a trial, right, for a drug. We'll figure out its patient population, whether it's randomized, how do they dose it, what are the primary endpoints, how are they differentiated between one or two types of clinical trials within the same asset, right, and in the same indication. And then for sort of published work, once the trial gets completed, whether you're in phase 2 or phase 3 or even in phase 1, right, we need to summarize it. What was the trial design? What is the indication? What is the patient population, safety results? And then finally, what are the primary endpoints and its results? Throughout our research, we tried to get to a level of sort of payer reimbursement and utilization, right? Because everyone wants to get reimbursed for the therapy. The physician prescribes it to a patient, the physician's office or the institution wants to get reimbursed, and the payers or the insurers will have certain sets of utilization controls, right, as to what kind of therapies need to be done first, second, and third. Those are first line, second line, third line treatments, and we'll learn about them during the course. And also, what are the utilization controls that they put in place in order for reimbursement pathways to occur? Excuse me. From all this research, right, part of it is to get sort of the hard facts, right? So those are the facts that you do from desktop research versus, market research. But you want to get to a point where what influences a market, and what are ancillary or peripheral factors that could influence a market today, 2 years from now, 5 to 10 years from now. Right, obviously speculative, but speculation is a core of forecasting, right? So it's good to be evidence-based. From a clinical development standpoint, and you'll get asked this all the time, is what is the unmet needs in an indication, right? Why are we playing it? And what's there that we can capitalize on? What's not there? What do other people are doing? And that comes from a combination of indication analysis as well as sort of primary market research. Once we go out into the market for primary market research, where we're talking to physicians or payers, we'll try to put together a TPP, right? A target product profile, which in one slide, it shows you uh, a summary essentially of the indication, the market, the drug's mechanism of action, how they're positioning it, the dose, the efficacy and safety, right? So you obviously won't have efficacy and safety for drugs in development, but you will for say marketed drugs. So we'll put, drug X in one column and we'll put a marketed therapy in the other so you can kind of see the difference and then you ask questions around it. As I said, at the conclusion of all this indication analysis, you're going to have to figure out what is the fraction of the market that the drug can take, its market share, right? So you'll start off on, if you go from right to left on this side, that's sort of all drug therapies. Systemic therapies are a small portion that, oral preferred treatments are a smaller portion, and then finally this drug is a small portion of that. This kind of visual, right, gives you a perspective on, at least from a relationship perspective, what percentage of the market the drug's capturing as opposed to the entire market, right? Then we build out a forecast model. We won't cover forecast models here for part one, but for part two, we definitely will, where we're trying to figure out sort of addressable patient population, who's receiving the drugs, and then take certain sets of cuts, right, to figure out at the very bottom what the annual cost of therapy is, and then what the sales would be, obviously, once the drug is launched. And then we try to summarize, right? We try to summarize what the segmented box on the left is basically the uh, picture of the previous slide where it shows kind of in ovals, but you have the entire sort of diagnosed patients with psoriasis, and then who's receiving uh, what types of treatment and what's the market size today. Today meaning, we did this analysis quite a few years ago, 2014, versus say in 2035, which you forecasted out what the shares would be and what the rationale is. Essentially, once you get to the quantitative part, right, when you build out the forecast, you have to do scenario analysis, right? What are the different types of uptake curves on base case, worst case, and parity case across uh, different scenarios that you put into place, and that can get obviously complicated. And one aspect that's not here is that finally we'll try to figure out, right, at the end of sort of part two, what the value of the drug is. So I hope you'll get a lot out of it. It's pretty extensive in its modules, and then but you have all the materials and supplemental materials, and of course support system to make sure it's successful. Thanks again. Enjoy the class.